The Last Client. Paul Warren was a lawyer who had built his reputation on defending the worst kind of people. He prided himself on never losing a case, no matter how vile or guilty his clients seemed. Money was all that mattered, and the truth? Well, that was negotiable. So when a mysterious, wealthy client contacted him for a last-minute defense in a high-profile murder trial, Paul barely asked any questions. The offer was too good to refuse, triple his usual fee for a case that would almost certainly end in an acquittal. The first meeting with the client was strange. The man's name was Ezekiel Crowley, and he had an unnerving calmness about him. His eyes were cold, almost hollow, and his skin had a waxy, pale texture that Paul found hard to ignore. Ezekiel didn't speak much about the case, just gave Paul the key details and assured him it would be an easy win. As they shook hands, Paul felt a sharp chill run up his arm, but he shrugged it off. Money was money. The trial began, and as promised, it was straightforward. Paul worked his usual magic, twisting facts, discrediting witnesses, and casting just enough doubt to sway the jury. Ezekiel sat stone-faced the entire time, never reacting to anything. By the end of the trial, Paul had secured another victory. The not guilty verdict was a sure thing. But that night, after the trial, Paul started to feel strange. He was restless, his mind racing. The face of the victim kept flashing before his eyes. A young woman who had been brutally murdered. He hadn't thought much of it during the trial. Just another case, just another paycheck. But now something gnawed at him. He tried to sleep, but as soon as he closed his eyes, he was overwhelmed by vivid nightmares. In his dream, he was standing in the courtroom, but it was empty, save for one figure. The victim's ghostly, blood-streaked face stared at him from the witness stand. Her mouth opened, but instead of a scream, a single word escaped. Guilty. Paul woke in a cold sweat, the word still echoing in his ears. Shaking it off as just stress, he headed to his office the next morning. But as he reached for the doorknob, his hand froze. Carved into the wood, faint but unmistakable, was the word guilty. He stumbled back, his heart pounding. It must be a prank, he thought. Maybe a disgruntled client or some sick joke. But that night, it got worse. His phone rang at exactly 3 a.m., but when he answered, there was no one there. Just the sound of faint breathing on the other end. When he hung up, the phone rang again. And again. He tried blocking the number, but it made no difference. The nightmares intensified, the victim now reaching for him, her cold, lifeless fingers wrapping around his throat. Every day, new scratches and carvings appeared around his house. Guilty, murderer, you knew. Desperate, Paul went to Ezekiel, accusing him of setting him up, of somehow being responsible for the haunting. Ezekiel just smiled, that same cold, hollow expression. I never said I was innocent, Ezekiel said, his voice chilling. You defended me, though. You chose to help me. Now you must live with that. Paul staggered out of the office, but the hauntings followed him. No matter where he went, the whispers of guilty echoed in his ears. He saw the victim in every reflection, her accusing eyes boring into him, never letting him forget. One night, Paul couldn't take it anymore. He returned to the courtroom where it all started, hoping to find peace. But when he arrived, the room was different. Dark, cold, and filled with shadows that seemed to watch him. As he stood there, the victim's ghost appeared, standing at the witness stand once more. Do you admit it? She whispered, her voice a raspy echo. Paul, broken and terrified, fell to his knees. "Yes," he sobbed. "Yes, I admit it. I knew all along." The courtroom doors slammed shut, and the last thing Paul heard was the judge's gavel pounding in the distance as the darkness closed in around him. The next morning, the cleaning crew found Paul slumped over the defense table, eyes wide open in terror. The room was empty, save for the single word etched into the wood of his desk. Guilty. 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 Guilty.